Hello and welcome to another episode of Educational. This is Roy.
Yeah.
Of course, we are the podcast that chronicles not only our journey through aging, but we are both fortunate enough to have parents that still are alive. And so, as with aging parents, there's always challenges and hurdles to overcome to making sure that they live safely and have the best care possible. So, we want people to know they're not alone from time to time. We have other professional guests as well as people that have good stories to tell, and that is what we have today. Ed's going to be our guest. I'm going to let Terry introduce him and talk about his story for just a minute.
Gangi was adopted at birth in New York City, an only child who made no effort to explore his heredity until at age 67, a visit to the military for members of his adoptive family were very stirred his interest. Over a period of 2 years, he archival research and peeled back the layers of his once unknown family. The story of his search and of his surprising discoveries is recounted in Ed's book, The Best Given, a memoir, which was published in 2020. Ed and his wife Linda live in Hillsborough, North Carolina. Their son James lives in Durham. Ed, thank you so much for taking time to talk to us today and share your story.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to be on the show.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it. So, kind of tell us a little bit about, you really, I guess at some point you knew that you were adopted, but you just didn't make the effort, and kind of what led you into deciding that this is something that you really wanted to pursue.
Well, as you said, I did know for quite a long time that I was adopted. Interestingly, though, I have no recollection of ever having that conversation with my adoptive parents. But I, as curious kids do, in my youth was going through some of my parents' papers and found an adoption decree there, which kind of confirmed what my situation was. And I just put it back in the file and just left it there. We never had the discussion. My parents didn't bring it up to me as far as I recall. And my assumption was if they weren't talking about it, I suppose I shouldn't either. Sadly, my dad passed away in the 1970s, my mother in the 1980s, and still I sat on it. I waited and waited, and it was probably not until about 2017 or so when my wife's parents, who had come down to North Carolina to live nearby, both passed away within a period of about 6 months. And we were up in New Jersey and in the cemetery where my adoptive mother's family was interred. And and for some reason, standing there over her parents' gravestone, I just got the itch. And when we got home, I started the search.
That's amazing. That would have been hard to bring up. I mean, at any time to have a hard conversation about adoption. Did you maybe feel like it was not respectful of your adoptive parents to talk about your birth parents? I would feel like that would be kind of a hard, I don't know if I'm saying it properly, but that would be a hard quote.
No, Terry, I think that's a very good insight. My feeling was always that I lived a pretty gifted life. My adoptive parents could not have cared for me and provided for me any better than they possibly would have for their naturally born child. But the more I think about it, and this is only in recent months, I'm sure there was some element in mind thinking that it would show a lack of gratitude to question it. And I think with my mom in particular, I think every adoptive mother probably feels threatened that they will,
They'll going to take the child.
Yeah, well, whether somebody's going to come back and take them or just that they won't be loved as much as, won't receive as much love as they've given. And that wasn't the case.
That's awesome. You get the best spot.
So it was, I finally fished out that piece of paper, which was the adoption decree, and the decree had my adoptive parents' signature on it. It had their attorney's signature on it, and it had a third signature, which I did not recognize. But by deduction, I knew that it was my birth mother's signature.
Okay. So is that, I guess, where does that journey start? I guess now, it's a good thing we've got the internet and there's so much more information actually available to us. But were they, I guess, once you started looking, were they close to the area where you lived in, or were they some distance away? How does that process? How does that process look when you start to unfold that and follow that trail?
Well, as you said, the internet makes things a lot easier than they ever were in the past. And as I started to search, having the gift of my birth mother's maiden name, it gave me a breadcrumb to work with and start the search. And as it turned out, I was brought home from the hospital at a day old to my parents' apartment, which was probably only about 3 city blocks away from where my birth mother had grown up.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
As I grew up, we made a couple of moves, but I grew up probably a 15-minute bus ride from where my birth mother, spent her high school years before she went off on her career. So we were very, very close. It's one of those things where, just we might have passed on the street and never known it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another thing I always think about is, especially, if you're in that close of an environment, is did you ever, were you able to ever uncover crossing paths with any of your, maybe extended family, cousins or grandparents or something like that, where you didn't really even know who they were at the time?
No, I couldn't say that I did find that. Uh,
Okay.
we were close and in proximity, but there was nothing in our personal lives that would have brought us
Okay.
that close together.
Okay. Interesting. So I guess that maybe for a minute, if you want to, I don't want to, if you're uncomfortable, that's understandable, but, kind of what are those emotions that you must have felt, once you started unpacking this? I know, probably excited in the beginning, but as you go through this process, do you ever maybe think it's not a good idea? Or are you always motivated to keep pushing?
I was constantly motivated. I say in the book that, it was rare during my childhood that I even gave much thought to who my mother was. Can tell you, probably gave no thought to who my father was, but I had made the assumption that she was probably some high school girl who stayed out late one night and then found out she had a problem to deal with. And it
Right.
wasn't that at all. As I started to peel back the layers on this, I went to our local library and I used ancestry.com and plugged in her name. And the first thing that came up using her name was a visa application filled out the year after I was born, traveling from Miami, Florida to Rio de Janeiro. And it had her
Wow.
picture on it. And that just, that floored me. You can always imagine, you think, and but to see the picture was one thing. And then I was certainly left with some level of confusion about, what's my mother doing going to Rio de Janeiro?
Right, right.
And it listed her, it was written in Portuguese, but I could make out pieces of it. And it listed her her profession as an artista, and no clue, had no idea what kind of an artista she might be. And that's where the search really began. I also found out she was 23 years old at the time that I was born.
So was she actually from Rio de Janeiro, or was she from the States and just or going to see family, or was she just going down there for work?
She was going there for work. What I ultimately found out, and this took a little bit of digging, but as I kept on going through the records, I found a marriage certificate for her, which was, she got married about 7 years after I was born. and after she had surrendered me for adoption. And it provided her husband's name, obviously. And, and I found out that she had also adopted a stage name. And using those, I was able to deduce that my mother had been a, a celebrity performer in the big ice skating shows in the 1940s and the 1950s.
Oh my,
Wow.
interesting.
So when she returned to skating after my birth in 1948, she joined a touring show called the Ice Vogues. They were a part of the Holiday on Ice group. And, and she returned, and their first stop was Dayton, Ohio, but their next stop was Havana, Cuba. Then they returned to the States, and then they went for a 6-month engagement in South America.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
So how long did this process take, from the day you said, I really want to do this, and digging out the adoption papers, kind of what is that timeline? And, and were you retired at the time you did this, or were you devoting full time, or were you still working and maybe just doing it on the weekends?
It was a good thing I was retired. It became an all-consuming journey, I think.
Yeah.
Just finding it nugget by nugget. As a matter of fact, just before we connected here today, I'm still digging for pieces, and I'm trying to find out more details about that South American trip. And somebody had sent me a picture and an advertisement basically saying, that they were in Havana from December 26th of 1948 through January 10th. And the whole story has been like that, just taking one little piece at a time. So the entire process to really come up with the complete story, and I wouldn't say it's totally finalized, took probably the better part of 2.5 years. And that was tracing down my mother's story. It was tracing down relatives who didn't know about me, and I didn't know about them. And it's been a great journey.
So did you go into this project intending to write a book, or did it just all into
I went into this not thinking I was going to write a book. I never knew there was a story. And and so there was no story expected and no book intended. But the more I found, I kept on thinking, I said, boy, this is a story worth sharing. And I did have a friend who kept on poking me and saying, you really need to write a book. And as I started writing about my search, in a series of memoirs, and as I started to uncover my mother's story, and I think she was a rather remarkable woman, I started to record her story. And a lot of that, I found out ultimately that she was no longer alive. She had passed away about 5 years prior. But I've met some cousins. I met people who had known her, unfortunately, and just given the ages, there weren't that many still around. But I was able to pretty well come up with her entire chronology and itinerary. And based on the discussions with those folks, I was able to pretty well piece together what probably happened at each of those stops, and what connected them.
so, and you didn't end up having any brothers or sisters?
Well, as a matter of fact, she had 2 sons who were born not long after she was married. I'm in touch with one. The second one, unfortunately, is deceased. Uh, as I said earlier, I never had any expectations about who my father might have been. And I think the story pretty well played out that, my mother had a summer romance, and I know where it happened and when it happened. And, at the time even prior to beginning this search, I had sent in a DNA sample to Ancestry. And some months after I had begun the search, I got my results back and discovered that I had a half brother on the paternal side, and through him discovered who my birth father was.
Tell us a little bit about your birth father.
My birth father, again, was no longer alive by the time that I began my search. He was between wives. As it turned out, he had 5 of them.
Oh, wow.
So he was between wife number 2 and wife number 3. I was very fortunate that my paternal half brother was very, very excited to find me, or me to find him, and was quite open about the kind of man his father was. And he was just an impetuous, impulsive type of person. And yeah, he said he was probably, he charmed my mother's pants right off her.
Oh,
And interestingly, when his mother, who is still alive, she's now 99,
wow.
wanted, she was a little bit concerned when she heard that, there was a son out there.
Yeah.
And so when she finally understood the chronology and put the pieces together, they hadn't met until after I was at least conceived. She was much more comfortable. And I've lost track of time with COVID, but we made a trip out to California. They live in San Francisco, and I went to visit my brother, and he said, my mother would like to meet you if you want to do that. And I was quite hoping that I could meet her. And we went out there, and she was very nice. She met my son, she met my wife, and then she dismissed them. She told my half brother, go show them the house. I want to talk to him.
Oh, okay.
And she was very, very generous. She said, I just wanted to tell you what I could about your father.
How nice.
And yeah, and it was a terribly generous thing. She didn't pull any punches. But she explained his background and his family, and and the disadvantages he grew up with. I think somehow explaining what made him the person he was.
Yeah. So during the process, what was the biggest surprise? I mean, I want to separate this between the process and what you found out, because I understand that finding out your mom was a star in the ice skating world, I mean, that's pretty cool. But beyond that, what are some surprises that you found out about the process itself, but then also some other surprises that you found out, about your family history?
Yeah, I think the greatest surprise, maybe not a surprise, but it was certainly a, a pleasant revelation, is just how nice and how generous people can be.
Yeah.
I reached out to people who didn't know me. I reached out to people who didn't know the story for the most part, and explained. And I got an outpouring of responses that were just totally generous. Whatever they knew, whatever they had, was returned to me. I think that was a reflection of my birth mother, because everything I heard about was, she was a generous person, she was a good person. And so I think she probably surrounded herself with people like that. But, people just were very, very embracing and very, very free with sharing information and recollections. And, it's been a constant story like that.
Oh, that's awesome. So I guess now going through the process, were there uh, were there roadblocks? I know we think that the internet gives us a lot of information, and it does, but sometimes when we start going through these channels, it's not quite as easy as, hey, I typed in this name and then it's just a flood of information comes up. Sometimes it is that easy, but kind of, was that journey difficult? Were there times that you just felt like that you had hit a roadblock and just said, I can't go any further?
Well, and I never got to the point where I was about to give up.
Okay.
As you said, the internet gave me a flood of information, but what it gave me was a flood of information about my mother in 1948 and 1955 and 1962, but it sort of stopped at that point. I found some records on Ancestry that I searched, which put her in Georgia with her family, and to the point that I had an address, but I didn't know if she was dead. I didn't know if she was alive.
Yeah.
And I started sending handwritten letters, and they kept on coming back returned, not at this address. And I did the same thing with my maternal half brother, who had been all over the map in Georgia. And every one of them came back not known at this address. So, we were really at the point of saying, uh, maybe I need to find myself a detective or something to go and search them out, because I just didn't have the resources to go running all over
Yeah.
Georgia looking.
Right. So what are some tips, because I think as we age, these questions, maybe in the middle of life, we're busy and it's not that important. And I think, maybe as we get to, as we age, these become more important. But what are some tips that you may want to offer others that are out there that maybe want to undertake this, or maybe they're in the middle of undertaking this?
Well, to those who want to undertake it, this is, I get the question quite often, how do you write a book? And I think it's the same thing. You start, do something, take some action, and, and approach it, approach it with a sense of curiosity. Uh, I think had I been afraid of what I would find, I never would have started. But I just dove in, and, and it's been very, very rewarding that way. I think, you need to persevere. You will hit those occasional brick walls, and there are ways around them, and there are people out there and resources to help you through them. Um, I think if you're looking at an adoption story in particular, you brought up the point of, is this disrespectful to the people involved? It's, I think, take the chance. If you have somebody you can talk to them. And if you don't, then there's nobody's feelings to hurt at this point, so just move forward with it. I wish I had started earlier, and I wish that I had asked more questions earlier.
But it's often the time that you started it, wonderful undertaking, and that you found humanity has risen up to your occasion, and everybody wanted to help. Great, yes, right there. I mean, not only to find it that your family and all about your mother, but the humanitarian aspect of it is amazing to me.
Yeah, it's been wonderful. It renewed wonderful memories with the cousins who I've met. It certainly has given, my maternal half brother, who has a very, very small universe. He lost his brother. His dad was older, so he was long deceased. He had lost his mother. And so it brought something into his life that was not there before. Um, and the people who had known my mother, you could see them light up, going back and reliving some of these memories from 50 and 60 years ago.
Wow.
I tell the story in the book about going out to Minneapolis and meeting a woman who had been my mother's roommate in San Francisco in 1947 when I was conceived. And and she was in a memory care facility, and it was kind of an interesting story. Her son had told me, the challenge is mom doesn't know anything about what she had for breakfast this morning, but mom can tell you everything that happened in 1947. And
Oh,
we were with her for about 5 hours, and when we
Wow.
left, she hugged us and she said, "This is the best day of my life for so many years, just going back and living through those memories." And it was a lovely experience. She brought so much to me, and and to know that we brought something back to her.
Yeah.
oh, sure.
The advent of DNA is our the public forums that we can put our DNA into now is got to be a big help. And a lot of people discount it because they say, well, mom or dad passed 20 years ago, theirs is not going to be in there. But the the nice thing about this is now you can kind of work your way backwards. If you find that cousin, it takes a little bit of detective work, but also if you just upload it, it'll show you all these connections, and then you can kind of work yourself back from there.
Yeah, you're exactly right. You can make some pretty fascinating discoveries that way. And I guess, if you've got folks who are worried about, well, I'm going to hurt somebody's feelings, so I'm going to keep this a secret. Yeah, I think the underlying message of DNA and the recreational DNA testing is there are no more secrets.
Right. Exactly.
There's a whole community out there that they call the NPEs, or the not parent expected communities, where you find secrets that have been hidden for a long time. And
Yeah.
it's probably better if you know what the story is to share it.
Yeah.
And everybody, I think, benefits from that.
Yeah.
Yeah, what are your thoughts about passing down family history?
Terry, I'm sorry, you faded
I'm
out there.
sorry, what are your thoughts about passing down family history?
I think it's a great thing. If I have a single regret, it's not asking my adoptive parents more about their background. I know everything in general, but I said to my wife the other day, now that I think about it, I don't even know how my adoptive parents met. And she said, "Oh, I know how they met. They met in the Signal Corps."
Yeah.
And I would like to know more of those details. And as I said earlier, just given our ages, there aren't that many people left around to ask these questions.
Yeah.
And I think at some point, we'll have generations following us who maybe aren't interested right at the moment, but they're going to say, "Gee, I wonder about grandma, or wonder about grandpa. Where did they come from?" And if somebody doesn't record that history, yeah, there's nothing to share.
Yeah.
So my son is 30 years old. He's pretty cool and pretty casual, and he's been impressed that I wrote a book, but I'm not sure how impressed he is with the story itself. Someday he will be, or his child will be, and at least it's recorded now.
Yeah.
And I think that's a gift to people.
We encourage everybody to do that. It's the open the communication for a couple reasons. Not only we want to find that history, but also we can start talking about our parents or our aging friends or loved ones' wants and needs, so we all know. So it's not I have an opinion, Terry has an opinion, maybe neither one of those are right.
Right.
Everybody always thinks they know better, and this is to me, it's a great segue to have those more difficult conversations. Is sit down and get mom, dad, grandpa, whoever, sit down, tell me a little bit about your history. Like myself, we have a very tight family, but I don't know anything about from my grandparents back. um,
Right.
I did the DNA thing and found out that back, I guess around great grandfather or great great somewhere there, somebody had moved to California. So I know all of our Texas people. We actually have a much larger contingent in California, which was very surprising because we don't really know any of them. But anyway, the other thing, there are services out there. It's you can do it by hand and make it up yourself, but ask these questions. Just maybe make it once a week. Ask a question, and that's what we are doing with our parents. Is getting them to say, tell us about your grandparents. And I think this week's question was, where did y'all used to go on vacation? And it's interesting for me, and like you said, my kids are in that 30-year range that they could probably care less about it right now. But when they get to be my age, I think that they're all going to want to know.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And I think what I hear sometimes is the older generations, there's probably the bulk of them would like to talk about it, but nobody has ever asked.
Right.
There are some who are reluctant to talk about it for whatever the reasons might be. Yeah, they just need to be prodded. And I would say if you've got somebody who's reluctant to talk, come back to them, ask
Yeah.
again, and ask those questions and write down the answers.
Yeah.
Or videotape
Yeah.
something.
Or
You
videotape,
know,
precisely.
Yeah.
everybody wants to be remembered, and they want their memories to live on, forever, to pass down to generations. And I love your story. I think it's so awesome that you did that.
One of my cousins has told me, yeah, he had an elderly father who passed away, who had a very interesting life. And he knew that a lot of that would get lost. He went over there one day with a tape recorder and a bottle of wine and lots of
Yeah.
extra cassettes. And he's got about 4.5 hours of
That's
audio
awesome.
tape with the man's story. And it is, I'd give my eye teeth to hear, either of my adoptive parents' stories or my birth mother's
Yeah.
stories, just to hear the voice.
Yeah.
Great idea.
Yeah, it is. And the audio and video equipment is it's very cheap nowadays. Storage is very cheap. That it's not like a long time ago when it was cost prohibitive. So I think those are great artifacts to pass down too. Is you may get to hear great grandmother tell her story in her own voice, and you just get that inflection and a lot more of that emotion in that, instead of me just telling you this is what somebody told me and written down. So I definitely suggest that.
And do it virtually. I mean,
Yeah.
there's no reason, no excuse not to do it. I mean, you can put it on the back burner. You can do it. You can do it anytime.
Life is very precious, and we never know, when we may lose somebody, and we don't have those tomorrow. So that's a good point.
And I suppose, if taking another tack, if you've got a story, and I know, we have, children and perhaps grandchildren, nobody is asking the questions and you want to share it. Yeah, record it now, do it yourself.
Yeah.
And, I know there are people out there with YouTube channels who do 5-minute video clips, put them up on YouTube, and one day
That's
we'll be
awesome.
gone, but
Yeah.
but all that video will remain.
Yeah, and like even with Zoom, of course, we're talking to somebody on the other end, but you can actually fire up your own Zoom, make your own recording, and put it up like that. We're going to live on forever. I think that's a
Right.
great idea. Great idea. Well, Ed, thanks so much for taking time out of your day. This is such an interesting story, and I'm so glad that it had a good outcome. And I know it's not over with, and hopefully you'll continue to just find out more and more information. So, if you wouldn't mind, tell people how can they reach out and get a hold of a copy of the book, or if they want to talk to you to get some advice.
I came prepared.
Okay. Yeah.
Actually, this is if you have another minute, I'll tell you a very interesting story.
Yes, please do.
When we first met my maternal half brother, he had a hard time wrapping his head around the fact that he had a half brother. He kept on saying, "Oh, Mama would have told me," and I kept on saying, "No, I don't think so." And he brought out my birth mother kept very, very detailed photo albums. Every place she went, she took pictures, and she dated them and she labeled them. And I knew that I had been conceived in San Francisco in 1947, because I knew that's where she was with her skating troupe. And he kept on telling me, no, she was with my daddy. And I knew that they didn't meet for quite some time after that. And he brought out a photo album, which was full of, the old Brownie snapshots, all black and white. And they started with her career in 1942, and we're flipping pages, one black and white snapshot after the other. And and I said, Ted, she was in San Francisco in 1947. And we finally, got up to the 1946 page and turned over to the next page. And this photograph, which was the only color photograph in the album, was in the center of the next page. And I don't know that you can read it, but at the top says August 1947, San Francisco, California.
Okay.
And it was like it was a gift that was just magically planted there. And from then on, he sort of said, well, I guess all women have a secret. And so we so he was a believer. He became a believer, and we stay in fairly close touch.
Interesting.
I love that his name is Ed. I mean, your name's Ed and his name's Ed.
Yeah, there are a bunch of name similarities too, but the book is called The Gift Best Given, a memoir. It was published in 2020. It can be ordered through any bookstore, or it's available through all the online retailers. And I have a website, and if it's ordered through the website, it can be done via credit card or PayPal. I'll be happy to personalize and autograph the book and ship it out the next day. And the website is www.digangiauthor.com. It's DIGANGI author.com.
All right, Ed, and we'll be sure and include that in the show notes so people can reach out and pick up a copy. Looks like an interesting read and such a great story. So I guess the message is a lot of messages. If you still have living relatives, communicate, get some things written down on tape, audio, video. If you were adopted and maybe want to seek out, that's an individual decision. If you want to seek out your birth family, it's so much, there's so much information out there that I can only assume it's a little easier now than it may have been, 20, 30, 40 years ago. So it can be done. And as Ed has had a happy ending to his story, we can only wish everybody has that same happy ending as well. But again, thanks a lot, Ed. We certainly do appreciate it. And that's going to do it for another episode of Educational. Of course, I am Roy.
Thank you, Ed. We appreciate it.
Terry, thank you so much. Roy, thank you for the invitation to join you.
You bet. You can find us at www.educational.com. We are also on all the social media channels, and a video of this recording of this interview will go up on YouTube when it goes live as well. We're on all the major podcast platforms, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google. If we're not on one that you listen to, please reach out. We'll be glad to get you added. So until next time, y'all take care of yourself.